Procedural texts are an important type of literature that are frequently used by people in their day-to-day lives, and they might not even know it. So it's important to know how to read and write procedural text. First, we need to know what are procedural texts. Procedural texts fall under the genre of nonfiction and they're informational text. The purpose of procedural text is to inform the reader how to complete a specific task. This can be broken down even further because procedural text can tell the reader how to do something or how to make something. Another important thing to take note of is text structure. Procedural texts are written in sequential order. This means that they provide information and directions in step-by-step processes for the reader. Some examples of procedural text include directions, instructions, recipes, lab procedures, rules for games, manuals, and agendas. You might frequently use these. For example, you might use directions in order to get to a new destination. You might use a recipe in order to create a new meal. And you might use lab procedures in your science classroom in order to do an experiment. Furthermore, you'll use instructions very frequently in the classroom, as well as rules for games for entertainment. The first part of procedural text is the goal. This establishes a clear purpose for the reader, and it refers to what will be done or made. So for example, if the procedural text is a recipe on making a cake, here you'll provide specific information on what type of cake it will be and what the outcome will be for the reader and the creator in that instance. Another important part is materials. This comes right after the goal. This explains the necessary materials needed in order to complete the goal, and these are displayed in list format. So when writing procedural text, you want to write down everything that you are using in order to complete the task in order for the reader to replicate it. Part 3 is the steps. This is by far the most important part of the procedural text. This gives the reader the step-by-step process that is necessary to complete the task. Like we discussed earlier, that's presented in sequential order. It's very important to take your time when writing the steps for a procedural text and when reading them in order to complete the task. When writing them, you want to write your procedural text, write the steps, and then trial it. So you may want to do it again using only the steps that you have written, or you might want someone else to perform the steps and see if they're able to complete the final task. From there, you can refine and perfect your steps. The final part of procedural text is the conclusion. This comes right after your steps, and it describes how the reader can determine whether or not they were successful in the procedural text. It gives them information of what they can compare their final product or what they completed to in order to see if they achieved it. It also summarizes important information learned throughout the procedure. So some other things that you might find in procedural text include diagrams or pictures in order to better help the reader get to this conclusion point. But really, the steps in writing them well will lead to the success of a procedural text.